up against the others in an effort to keep out the cold, head empty and heavy at the same time, brain a whirlpool of decaying memories, indifference, dead end the spirit. Here or elsewhere, what difference did it make? To die today or tomorrow or later. Night was long and never ending. When at last the gray glimmer of light appeared on the horizon, it revealed a tangle of human shapes, heads sunk upon shoulders, crunched piled on the top of the other, like a field of dust covered tombstones in the first light of dawn. I tried to distinguish those who were still alive from those who had gone, but there was no difference. My gaze was held for a long time. By one laid on his eyes open, staring into the void. His livid face was covered with a layer of frost and snow. My father huddled near me, wrapped in his blanket, his shoulders covered with snow. And was he dead too? I called him no answer. I would have cried out of it if I could have done so. He did not move. My mind was invaded suddenly by that realization. There was no more reason to live, no more reason to struggle. The train stopped in the middle of the deserted field. The sadness of the halt woke some of those who were asleep. They straightened themselves up, throwing startled looks around them. Outside, the SS went by shouting, "Throw out all those that are dead. Our corpses is outside." The living rejoiced. There would be more room. Volunteers set to work. "Here's one, take him." They undressed him, the survivors avidly sharing out his clothes. Then two gravediggers took him, one by the head, one by the feet, and then threw them out the wagon like a sack of flour. From all directions came cries, "Come on, here's one, the next one to me. He doesn't move." I woke from my apathy just for the moment. Two men came up to my father. I threw myself on top of his body. He was cold. I slapped him. I rubbed his hand off, crying, "Father, father, wake up. They're trying to throw you out of the carriage." His body remained inert. The two gravediggers seized me by the collar. "Leave him. You can see perfectly well he's dead." "No," I cried. "He isn't dead. Not yet." I set work to slap him as hard as I could. After a moment, my father's eyelids moved slightly over his glazed eyes. He was breathing quickly. "You see," I cried. The two men moved away. 20 bodies were thrown out of our wagon. Then the man resumed its journey, leaving behind a few hundred naked dead deprived of burial. In the deep snow in the field in Poland, we were given no food. We lived on snow. It took the place of bread. 3 days were like nights, and the nights left the dregs of the darkness in the souls. The train was traveling slowly, often stepping for several hours, and the setting off again. I never ceased snowing. All through the days and nights we stayed crunching, one on top of the other, never speaking a word. We were no more frozen bodies. Our eyes closed. We waited merely for the next stop so that we could unload more dead. 10 days, 10 nights of traveling. Sometimes we would pass through German townships very early in the mornings. Usually the workmen were going to work. They stopped and stared at us, but otherwise showed no surprise. One day, when we had stopped, a workman took a piece of bread out of his bag and threw it into the wagon. There was a stampede. Dozens of starving men fought each other to death for a few crumbs. The German workmen took a lively interest in this spectacle. Some years later, I watched the same kind of scene at Aden. The passengers on our boat were amusing themselves by throwing coins at the natives, who were diving to get them. An attractive, aristocratic Parisian was deriving special pleasure from the game. I suddenly noticed that two children were engaged in a death struggle, trying to strangle each other. I turned to the lady. Please, I beg you, do not throw any more money in. Why not? She said. I like to give to charity. In the wagon where the bread had fallen, the real battle had broken out. Men threw themselves on top of each other, stamping on each other, tearing each other, biting each other. Wild beasts of prey with animal hatred in their eyes. An extraordinary vitality had seized them, sharpening their teeth and nails. A crowd of workmen and curious spectators had collected along the train. They had probably never seen a train such a large cargo. Soon, nearly everywhere pieces of bread were being thrown into the wagons. The audience stared at these skeletons of men fighting one another to the death for a mouthful. A piece fell into our wagon. I decided that I would not move. Anyway, I knew that I would never have the strength to fight with a dozen savage men. Not far away, I noticed an old man dragging himself along the forest. He was trying to disengage himself from the struggle. He held one hand to his heart, the other fist he had received a blow to the chest. Then I understood. He had a bit of bread under his shirt. With a remarkable speed, he threw it out of his mouth. His eyes gleamed. A smile like griddins lit his dead face, and was immediately extinguished. A shadow had just loomed up near him. The shadow threw itself upon him, fell to the ground, stunned with blows. The old man cried, Mir, Mir, my boy, don't you recognize me? I'm your father. You're hurting me. You're killing your own father. I got some bread for you too. For you too. He collapsed. His fist was still clenched around a small piece. He tried to carry it to his mouth, but the other one threw himself upon him and snatched it. The old man again whispered something. Let out the rattle. The man died amid the general indifference. His son searched him, took the bread, and began to devour it. He was not able to get very far. Two men had seen the hurdle themselves upon them. Others joined. When they withdrew, the next to me were two corpses side by side, father and son. I was 15 years old. In our wagon, there was a friend of my father's called Mirkatz. He had worked as a gardener at Buna and used to bring us a few green vegetables, occasionally being less undernourished than the rest of us. He had stood up to imprisonment better because he was relatively more vigorous. He had been put in charge of the wagon. One on the third night of the journey, I woke up suddenly and felt two hands on my throat, trying to strangle me. I had just time to shout, Father, Father! Nothing but this word. I felt myself suffocating, but my father had woken up to seize my attacker. Too weak to overcome him, he had the idea of calling Meerkats. Come here quickly. There's someone strangling my son. A few moments later, I was free. I still did not know why the man wanted to strangle me. After a few days, Meerkat spoke to my father. Shalom, I'm getting weak. I'm losing my strength. I can't hold on. Don't let yourself go under, my father said, trying to encourage him. You must resist. Don't lose faith in yourself. But Meerkat groaned heavily and replied, I can't go any longer, Shlomo. What can I do? I can't carry on. My father took his arm and Meerkat. The strong man, the most robust of us all, wept. His son had been taken from him from time in the first selection, but it was now that he wept. He was now what he cracked up. He was finished, and at the end, it was tethered. On the last day of our journey, a terrible wind arose. It snowed without ceasing. We felt that the end was near, the real end. We could never hold out in this icy wind, in these gusts. Someone got up and shouted, "We mustn't stay sitting down at a time like this. We shall freeze to death. Let's all get up and move a bit." We all got up. We held our damp blankets more tightly around us, and we forced ourselves a few more steps to turn around where we were. Suddenly, a cry rose up from a wagon, a cry of a wounded animal. Someone had just died. Others' feelings they were too about to die. And immediately his cry and their cries seemed to come from beyond the grave. Soon everyone was crying, wailing, groaning, cries of distress hurled into the wind and into the snow. The county spread, and the others' carriages. Hundreds of cries rose simultaneously, not knowing against whom we cried, not knowing why. The death rattled of a whole convoy who felt the end upon them. We were all going to die here. All limits had been posed. No one had any strength left. And again, the night would be long. Meerkats groaned. Why don't they shoot us all right away? The same evening, we reached our destination. It was late at night. The guards came to unload us. The dead were abandoned in the train. Only those who could still stand over were able to get out. Meerkats stayed in the train. The last day had been the most murderous. 100 of us got into the wagon, a dozen of us got out. Among them, my father and I, we had arrived at Buchenwald.